The beautiful community. And I am an intellectual taxi for today's purposes because I'm going to react upon the request of some of our British audience, but this is going to be globally interesting as a chat, to the extraordinary Green Party by-election win that occurred yesterday in the UK. So let's talk about this. Now, we've got a collapse of the centre all over the West, the collapse of the centre of politics. And what we'll chat about today is largely going to be a meditation on that. Zach Polanski is the leader of the UK Greens. Let's listen to him for a few seconds.
Hannah Spencer was really clear throughout the whole campaign. She wants to lower people's bills, protect the National Health Service, and rebuild our public services. I know that.
So Hannah's a plumber, a plasterer. She's on the local council, but now she's going to be in the National Parliament for the Greens.
Message was resonating from doorstep to doorstep. I heard it all yesterday. I heard it for the last 5 weeks. I think what's really interesting is this was the Green Party's 127th target seat. So I think that says there's no-go areas for the Green Party in England and Wales.
Why is this relevant? Because of this. The Greens finished with 41% of the vote. Reform came second with 29% of the vote, and Labour was third with 26% of the vote. Now, this is a seat in the Greater Manchester area that was regarded as a safe Labour seat. And what's distinctive here is that neither the Conservatives nor Labour won, but also neither of them finished second, even though they have been the only two parties of governance in the UK since 1924. Beautiful community. Coalition governments put aside for a moment. The UK has been a parliamentary democracy in a substantive sense, in fact long before then, but in a substantive sense from about 1832. The last time this was a sort of a Tory liberal rivalry, where really the 1910s. In 1906 you get this extraordinary but rather thin victory of the Liberals with Henry Campbell Bannerman. Then you get Asquith and Lloyd George. Then you get between 22 and 24 a couple of years of Tories, and the first Labour government is in 1924. So this is quite an alarming result, because it makes you go like this: ooh, my political reality is capsizing. And you feel a lot of that about your political reality wherever you are. And so this is ooh. Now, one of the things we need to look at is this woo perhaps good? Or is it bad? Or is it both in different dimensions? This was a safe Labour seat. We've had a general election in the UK recently, and Labour got a big win there and a massive majority. This would have been regarded as a safe seat indeed, and for it to go to the Greens required Labour to drop by 25 percentage points. We won't legislate on this, but there are allegations that Labour's got into trouble with the way they pushed the tactical voting case, because what they were basically saying is, we are the only guys in town who can stop reform in this seat. And they didn't even finish second. Now, what UK viewers will know is that Keir Starmer, leader of the Labour Party and the Prime Minister, through Labour's National Executive Committee, blocked Andy Burnham from running in this seat. And Andy Burnham is the Mayor of Greater Manchester, because Andy Burnham is a leadership rival. Passive behaviour. A proactive behaviour says he's a leadership rival, I'm going to make him run, he could win for us, and I'm going to put him into an important position in government. And if he indeed takes over from me, well, so be it. That's, going to help the party. But we are living in the age not just of technocratic centrism as the only solution, as the only alternative to ex-right authoritarianism. We're living in an age in which technocratic centrism is increasingly passive and defensive and scared. And paradoxically, that's because they see the ex-conservative threat coming. They see the threat of reform in the UK coming. But that makes them do less, not more, which is absolutely unbelievable. It's like being chased by a bear and recognizing the threat and saying, okay, I'm not going to do anything in response. I'm not going to lie down on the floor and spread out. I'm not going to run away. I'm not going to take any kind of constructive action. I'm just going to largely pretend the bear isn't there. And hopefully, if I don't make too many left field, unexpected moves, this danger will pass. I'm struggling quite a bit with my health and with breathing, and that's why my brain melted down into such an appalling analogy, beautiful community, but you get the point. Now, the Green victory puts into question Keir Starmer's strategic positioning, because he focused on reform, he focused on not ceding ground to reform, and he shifted right on immigration, on the EU, and on the economy. The shift right on immigration is largely inevitable. The shift right on the EU and on the economy isn't. So let's look at the political entrepreneur who ran and didn't win, but finished second in this by-election, and that's Matt Goodwin. So this is a piece about him. That's a very nice commentary on the entrepreneurialism on the ex-conservative right. This is a piece by James Bloodworth. So let's read it a little bit. And this is 6 months ago, before Goodwin is thrust into politics. I just spent 4 days in Hungary, a conservative country criticized by elites across the West. I saw no crime, no homeless people, no riots, no unrest, no drugs, no mass immigration, no broken borders, no self-loathing, no chaos. And now I've just landed back in the UK. It wasn't unusual during the 1930s to hear credulity like this from flatterers and scribblers returning from the East. Such reveries would usually draw on utopian ideology. A new civilization was being built, the riddle of history had been solved, it was important to spread the good news. But what's Matt Goodwin's excuse? The 43-year-old former academic and fellow Chatham House think tank made the above remarks after a trip to Hungary in the summer of 2024. They were subsequently shared online by Balázs Orbán, political director of the Prime Minister Viktor Orbán. The two are not related. What prompted a promising academic to throw it all away in the name of becoming a propagandist of the radical right? Now, I don't myself share that language. I prefer to say that these are the ex-right rather than the radical right or the hard right, but we're basically labeling slightly differently the same political phenomenon. Goodwin's story is not without pathos. Following a stint as an associate professor of politics at the University of Nottingham, he joined the University of Kent in 2015, becoming one of the youngest professors in the country. Almost a decade later came the fall. My professorship, everything I had ever wanted, everything I worked for was over. Goodwin writes of his departure from academia in the summer of 2024, when he took voluntary severance from Kent. This is a really good piece. I actually recommend it if you encounter it in Prospect. I'm going to jump quite a few paragraphs down. The conservative movement has always drawn strength from its adaptability. And Goodwin isn't the only one who has embarked on an ideological journey. A political realignment in the US has seen the party of Ronald Reagan become the party first of Pat Buchanan and then of Trump. As John Gans shows in his book When the Clock Broke, recommended book by the way, Trump's vice president, J.D. Vance, first gained prominence with a book that sought to explain the pathologies of poor white people. At the time, he wrote Hillbilly Elegy 2016. Vance despised Trump. He even went so far as to compare him to Hitler in a conversation with an old college roommate. But the likes of Vance and Goodwin are what the political philosopher Vlad Vexler, have you ever heard of him, as accurately identified as political entrepreneurs. Such a person serves the political landscape for self self-advancement. They're not positively out to break the democratic game, but if that is the price of self-advancement, so that's the full quote from me, so be it. Very nice. To political entrepreneurs, principles are contingent. They see which way the wind is blowing and pivot accordingly. Goodwin's type, so-called heterodox intellectual turned populist demagogue, is a morbid symptom of the digital age. To paraphrase Camus, he is an empty prophet for mediocre times. A selection of glossy headshots on Goodwin's website suggests a foray into party politics could at some point beckon, and it beckoned very soon. That was certainly the view of at least one former academic colleague I spoke to, and why not? Goodwin is precisely the sort who could make a name for himself in these strange times. What Goodwin lacks in charisma, he makes up for in self-promotion. So it's very, very important to frame what is happening on the X-right in entrepreneurial terms. Right? These are not people who are substantively engaging in solution generation to the challenges we face. They're engaging in riding, surfing our grievances. Some of them are indifferent whether their surfing activities undermine institutions. Some of them are positively out to break institutions. Now, let's say a little bit about the Greens, who got into trouble for one aspect of their campaign.
We can show a video clip of this leaflet. Now, this features Sir Keir Starmer alongside the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Deputy Prime Minister David Lammy alongside Benjamin Netanyahu, of course, Israel. There were translations of leaflets, including these translations: "Give the faltering walls a push, Labour must be punished for Gaza. We have to defeat reform and vote for the Greens. To give Muslims a strong voice, give your vote to the Greens." Are those leaflets, are those messages
appropriate? So let me try to frame this. The Greens ran in different languages, and here in Bengali, the message that Labour needs to be punished for Gaza. And they've really been picked on for this. Let's analyze this, and then we'll say something more widely about where the Greens are at in the UK. Here is how I recommend to view this. The issue is absolutely not what position a political party takes on Gaza. The issue is whether the UK, your own country, is the primary subject of the position you take. Right? So what you don't want is to bring about a situation where your discourse feeds the narrative that the UK is just a secondary object to generate certain results for the primary object of political concern, which is Gaza. That can't happen. And I think that from what I have seen, some of the Green messaging may have been on the border of that. But forget about this particular case. This is just generally an important principle that we need to understand. So what I want to say is that the primary subject of UK political discourse about Gaza or Ukraine or you name it has to be the UK and not Gaza or Ukraine. Right? Discourse must be mediated through national responsibility and deliberation. Right? The UK is not a secondary arena for the pursuit of Gaza's cause. Right? So when you're talking in UK political context, you can't say Ukraine needs this. You need to say Britain's security, Britain's values, treaty commitments require this. If somebody asked me to do an ethical pass on that message, we're going to punish Labour for Gaza, especially when you're talking about that message being delivered to a particular group in a particular language, I do think that there's a risk there of what I would call civic decentering, right? What I'd rather prefer is a message that said, Britain failed in its responsibility to Gaza, Britain failed in its responsibility to itself under the Labour government, right? And that's a very substantive difference. So there's a risk of, if you like, a kind of bypass of the political entity to which you belong. And that's the issue here. The issue is not whether you use the G word, it's not how bad you think what happened in Gaza is, whether you think it's absolutely atrocious or much worse than that. That's not the point. The point is that the UK has to be the central political entity. And language that risks decentering the UK is indeed dangerous, whatever issue it applies to. Now, the message we have heard from the Conservatives, the right, and from the ex-right are that voters are stupid and immoral, and that's why they voted the Greens in. Which is a very interesting replication of the way that centrist technocrats lecture Trump voters. So we're going round and round telling citizens to wise up. In fact, while the Greens don't have many solutions, their key policy concerns are wealth inequality, drug policy reform, net zero, clean air and rivers, Trident, nuclear weapons, and Gaza. Their challenges are that they lack governing solutions, that they are not what I have historically desired from the UK Green Party, which is for them to be a policy catalyst for the bigger parties rather than to think of themselves as the future party of government. They have a huge challenge still inside the party with hyper-identity politics. They have basically a history of asphyxiating contestation, political contestation, between trans rights and the rights of biological women. The position of the Green Party has been that there can never be a conflict of rights between these two parties, and if you think there is, you're a bigot. Quite a few people have been expelled or pushed out of the Green Party for that purpose, and the Green Party has been challenged by hyper-identity politics in a similar way to the way the climate movements have been. So just like Extinction Rebellion, the climate activist movement imploded because what happened inside is that everybody kept telling everybody else that they needed to center racial justice first, and if they didn't, they couldn't talk about climate or climate justice. And then other people said they needed to center trans rights first, and if they didn't, then they couldn't say anything about the climate. So it became an anti-pluralistic movement. Now, Zach Polanski calls himself a pluralist, and we're going to see how his positions on these issues develop over time because he's relatively new in his role. There's also a clear lack of grasp of economic policy in the Green Party. So what they need to do is they need to first of all give an account of how things work, and then an account of how they're going to inflect how things work if they come into government. And another challenge with the Green Party, quite frankly, is that they are relegating the climate crisis and positioning themselves as a populist left political entity that is in pursuit not of inflecting the climate policy of the bigger parties, but in pursuit of riding into power on a populist left ticket. Now, I wrote this a couple of years ago during the Rishi Sunak government. I said that the Sunak government will fail. I then said that Labour will take power, which they did, and will fail and will enter its deepest crisis yet, which will happen, which is happening. I said that the Tories will continue to fragment, which is happening. I then said that electoral reform may occur and it will fail to bring stability, that authoritarians will circle power, and that by the 2030s democracy will hang in the balance. I said that's a possible scenario, not a definite scenario, but it's a scenario that we should be sort of bracingly alert about. We should be aware that this is what we don't want to allow to happen, and so far we are a few steps along that rather frivolous Twitter prediction. Now, let me just make one final remark, and that's perhaps to go back to what I just said about the Greens and trans people. Because I have a platform, it's not as big as it could be because of my health, and we certainly don't have 250,000 people regularly on the main channel as we used to for a couple of years. But it's a message I'm going to be pushing really, really hard. That it's time to get really, really serious advocating, and the key word here is re-advocating for the rights of trans people, for the rights of women, for the rights of every kind of ethnic minority. Why do I say this? Because at the moment, structurally disadvantaged minorities are falling into a gap, and this is critical, and we're not talking about it. We're not talking about it because there are two rather delusional positions, or one delusional position and one unlovely position. The first delusional position says that we can just continue using the exclusionary language of identity politics that takes political disagreement, hyper-identity politics, which takes political disagreement to be moral disagreement, takes moral disagreement to be disagreement about identity, and takes identity disagreement to be something that can't be debated and needs to be institutionally entrenched. That's gone. It's over. In other words, if you're advocating for the rights of trans people using that discourse, which is basically what's happening today, you are making no progress at best, and you're regressing at worst. If you're advocating using hyper-identity politics for the rights of women, you're regressing or making no progress. So that entire language needs to be scrapped. The same with every kind of ethnic minority. We immediately need to start strongly advocating for the elevation of structurally disadvantaged minorities via the language of the public good, via the language of solidarity, via the language of fairness, via the language of inclusion, via the language of participation and equal chance of access to the fruits of our society. Because what we, I think, are very complacent about, particularly on the delusional hyper-identity politics side, this bubble that's burst, but some people who were in it still haven't woken up to it, is we're delusional about the fact that rights can't be reversed. We think that we've got to where we've got to, and the only question is, are we going to make more progress? We're on the cusp of 20 years of significant reversal of rights. Right? And here is the interesting thing. I am critical of hyper-identity politics, but in practice, the majority of the criticism of hyper-identity politics on the ex-conservative right is fake. Because what's being criticized isn't hyper-identity politics, it's just identity politics. The identity politics that generated the inclusion revolution of the 1960s. The identity politics that in fact is compatible with fairness, solidarity, public good, love of citizenship, and so on. So they're attacking democracy, and they're attacking the idea that we're all in this together, that we're all citizens here. And they're claiming that all they're attacking is wokeism or hyper-identity politics. That's not true. And this is another difficult balance for us, because we have to realize that there's a real urgent crisis that hyper-identity politics needs to be removed and substituted, right, by different discourse. But that almost all of the attacks on the hyper-identity politics are prejudicial, bigoted, exclusionary, and destructive. It's difficult for us to keep in mind, because if 98% of attacks on a thing are really, really bad and worse than the thing that they're attacking, surely the thing they're attacking must be good. But that ain't so. So this requires us to be, really double-minded. Now, another very important framework here for the elevation of minority groups is class. Various kinds of structural and class inequality. So, we've got to wake up to this, and we're going to talk about this because the attacks on wokeism on the ex-conservative right are not attacks on wokeism. They're attacks on you and I. They're attacks on well, they're not attacks on me in the sense that I'm a white heterosexual male. And tragically, we're moving towards an age of white identitarian politics, where many political actors will be destructively arguing for the deprioritization of everybody who doesn't belong to that privileged group. We haven't got there yet, but we're getting there, and we need to resist effectively. And hyper-identity politics will just ensure we absolutely lose. So it's an attack on all of us in the sense that we're all committed to being inclusive. We're all committed to the idea that everybody is going to sit at the table of politics. We're committed to the idea that it shouldn't be the case that some of us matter a lot more than others in our polities. And it requires us to wake up to this reality that we've got to begin re-advocating for the rights of disadvantaged, deprioritized, or potentially disadvantaged and deprioritized groups. And we'll be talking a lot more about this. Final remark. This circles us back to the Greens. For all of the lightness of the Greens politically, for all of the naivety there, at the level of not having a vision for the country, at the level of not having coherent policy solutions to challenges that they address themselves to. For all of that, and for all of the criticism about some of the sectarian way they campaigned, they are still fundamentally an inclusive populist party. They are closer to Bernie Sanders, who is an inclusive populist, than they are to Trump, who is an exclusionary populist. And that's a very important distinction. It shows that populism, or at least some degrees of populism, are potentially politics you could be critical of in various dimensions, but not because of the populist element itself. It doesn't necessarily have to be negative, especially if it's balanced with responsibility toward the preservation of institutions and counter-majoritarian checks and balances. We've gone in circles a little bit, but I think all of what we've said is really helpful toward grounding what the hell is happening in our domestic politics. Lots of love and talk very soon, beautiful community.